Well, I'm Roy Smythe. I'm the Chief Medical Officer for Strategy and Partnerships at Philips. And I'm here talking about how big data and artificial intelligence can make clinical trials more effective, more efficient, and hopefully healthcare more equitable for the world. So for example, the NIH All of Us trial, where they're entering more than 1 million patients in sort of an open-ended trial to collect patient data, patient genomics, patient physiology, trying new devices and so forth. The effort there is basically to collect the data that could then be used later on to create these digital twins, to create this pool of data that you could test questions against without ever actually having to take those patients and enter them into trials. And so I think it's a good example of a trial that is beginning to get at this issue of collecting data from individuals that can be used later to model clinical trials where you're not actually having to enter patients into clinical trials themselves. The problem right now is that even for conventional therapeutics, again, we're not talking about all these about to be identified biologic and molecular targets, even for conventional drugs, we struggle to get enough patients into the trials to answer the questions. And so unless we do this, unless we're able to collect data from individuals and then use that data again in some other way to model and answer these questions, we're going to have all these potential therapeutics sitting out here for your kids and grandkids to benefit from that we can't answer the question of whether or not they'll be effective. There won't be enough people to enter into the clinical trials. I think it is. I think, I think that, again, we're not going to be able to answer the questions that are going to be posed with the current methodology. And so how do you solve the problem? How do you answer the questions? How do you determine if this growing, exploding volume of new therapeutics is useful or not useful or maybe even dangerous? And the way to do that is by using modeling. And AI can do that for us by creating digital twins, by doing real-time research, things like rather than running clinical trials to determine if a drug has adverse effects, you can actually model that in patients in real time by using genomics and proteomics and so forth and big data and AI. A lot of data currently that could be useful in clinical trials to help answer these questions, solve these problems without actually having to run the old-fashioned, enter patients into a trial sort of thing, is not being used. Things like information in x-rays, information that's bottled up in the physiology of patients in an ICU. When I talk about that information, I'm talking about the things that humans can't see or discern. Radiomics, for example. Taking the information from the physiology and the images that are captured in patients that are entered into clinical trials and then using that sort of in a companion diagnostic way to answer questions more effectively and more efficiently than can be answered now. And so there's lots of ways that companies like Philips that aren't necessarily thought of traditionally as clinical trials companies could contribute to making clinical trials more efficient and more effective. I think the argument is fairly, it makes itself. I don't think anyone even needs to make the argument.